Hey everybody, we've kind of gotten away from this, but I want to start making these videos again to go over what we are covering in class as a way for people to check back in case you are struggling with the content or in case you miss class or whatever reason, so that you can look over this as a online resource. So today, what this video is going to be talking about is, and this is the video for November 16th, so it was what we covered in class today. It is reviewing multiplication and multiplying by tens. Okay, so the first thing we want to make sure we talk about is what is multiplication. Okay, so multiplication is a idea that helps us to find total amounts of something, to find the amounts of groups of something, and it is really very similar to repeated addition. So let's flip over to the whiteboard and we'll just kind of start talking. So when I mean repeated addition, what I mean by that is if we're going to look at, we'll just say 3 times 5. That is the same thing as 5 threes. So, sorry, 5 threes, 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 3, or, right, 3 fives. 5 plus 5 plus 5. Either of them will get you 15, our total amount. And we also remember that it doesn't matter if you flip multiplication. What I mean by that is 3 times 5 is the same thing as 5 times 3. It's like addition in that way. Okay, you can flip it, but not like subtraction and division, which you cannot flip the order. It would substantially change the answer and what we're trying to ask. Okay, so let's just jump into some multiplication and start talking about multiplying by tens. Okay, so when we multiply by tens, okay, if we're going to start with, we'll say 3 times 10. Okay, so 3 times 10 is really asking you for 10 threes or 3 tens. Okay, if we were going to solve this by addition, we're doing 10 plus 10 plus 10, but we're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it with multiplication. The thing with multiplying by tens is what you should need to imagine is, look at the 10, that there is an imaginary, well, it's not imaginary, but a not talked about decimal place after that 3, okay, to hold the place value. So it's really 3.0, okay? That 0 we don't really talk about because there's nothing there. That decimal place is just after the ones place, and it starts talking about things that are less than 1, and we're going to get to at the end of the year. But really what I'm saying is some people say, well, when you multiply 3 times 10, you take the 3, you put a 0 at the end, and you have 30. That is pretty much true. But what we're really doing is when you multiply by 10, you move that over one place value is what's really happening. And that's why it becomes 30. Okay, this is important because when we start multiplying by hundreds and things like that, it's not just add these zeros on. Okay, what it is you're moving that place, you're moving that decimal over. Okay, so for simple terms, yes, you are just adding a 0 to the end. But what you're really doing is moving that over 1. Okay, so we'll do a couple examples. Okay, if we're going to look at it as, let's say, 9 times 10. Okay, so we think about our 9, we move that over 1, and then when there is that gap there, you fill it in with a 0. So 9 times 10, or 10 nines, is 90. Okay, so we'll do a couple. Say we have slightly more complicated. Let's say 12 times 10. Well, if we have 12 and we move that over 1 and we have a 0 where that would go, you end up with 12 tens or 120. Okay? And even if we had a large number and we're multiplying it by 10, let's just say we have 327 times 10 or 327 tens. Well, that's the same thing as 327 tens, or 3,270. Okay? Now, one thing is, and we talked about this in class a little bit, when you're giving your answer, make sure you write it out, add in your zeros, and get a full picture of it before you answer, because a lot of times you'll end up answering, 3270 or 32,007 away, and you'll kind of catch yourself. Make sure you get your full answer, write in the commas, put the whole answer before you start reading it out loud. That's just a little tip I can give you guys. Okay? Now, similarly, if we were going to start multiplying by 100s, okay, so say I had 5 times 100. That's the same thing as 5 100s. Or if we had that 5, instead of moving that place 1, we're going to move it 2. So it'd be adding 2 zeros. Okay? So 5 hundreds is 500. Okay? And similarly, if we were going to go through this and just have a couple here, let's say 6 times 100, and we'll say 19 times 100. Okay, both of these. 6 times 100, 6. You have that kind of implied decimal there. We're going to move it over 1, 2. So you have 2 zeros, or 600, or 6 100s. You can just count by hundreds. 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600. And with 19, move that over. You have 1,900. So far, pretty easy, pretty simple, okay? But let's get into a little bit more of the in-depth. Let's start talking about when we're multiplying by not just 10, but say 30 or 50 or something like that. So let's look at this problem. Let's do 3 times 50. Okay, so notice it's not a 1 in the tens place anymore. Now it's 3 times 5 tens, or 3 times 50. This is actually not that much more difficult to do if you know what you're doing. So what you do is start by 3 times 5. Ignore that 0. Ignore the fact that it's 5 tens. Just start with 3 times 5 ones. Okay? 3 times 5 is 15. But it's not 5 ones. It's 5 tens. So 3 times 5 tens is 15 tens, or 150. Okay? So really what we're doing is you're breaking it into 50 is 5 tens. Okay? So if we start thinking about it that way, you can start to do some of these that are even slightly more complicated without putting a lot of work and working out an algorithm and things like that. So let's look at another one. Let's just say we had 6 times 40. Okay? I'm going to give you guys a second to try to do this at home. Okay, I want you to pause the video, take a second, okay, and we're going to go over it. I'll pause for about 5 seconds. All right, so when we do this, you're thinking of this as 4 tens. Okay, so when you do it that way, 6 times 4, well, that's 24. Okay, but it's not 4 ones, it's 4 tens, so it's 24 tens, or 240. Now, what if you said, well, Mr. G, what about if we're doing it with the hundreds? Well, it's the same thing. If this was 400, that's 4 hundreds, right? It would be, again, 6 times 4 is 24, but it's not 24 ones, it's 24 hundreds. 2,400, okay? Same exact idea, okay? Let's look at another one. If we were going to do, we'll say 8 times 600. Okay, and I'll give you a second to pause this and try it out yourself. I'm not going to wait in real time, but I'll give you a minute. Okay, so if we were going to look at this, again, it's 6 hundreds. And keep in mind that if it was 600 times 8, this would work the exact same way. I'm just writing it this way for right now just to keep things straight. But keep in mind, 600 times 8 is the same thing as 8 times 600. Okay, so 6 times 8 is 48. But it's not 48 ones because it's 6 hundreds, right? 8 times 6 hundreds is 48 hundreds, or 4,800. Okay? And as we get going, we'll start to get a little bit more complicated with this. For right now, we just want to make sure that we're connecting this with what we learned last year in 3rd grade, okay? And keeping in mind that when we say these things, when you hear me say things like 600s, that's on purpose because we want to start thinking of these numbers as quantities, not just numbers and not just like math problems floating in space, okay? Because when we can work with these quantities and break 600 into 6 hundreds, you can really start to understand what's going on. And then you can even I'll start show this in the coming days, some interesting things like finding out 8 times 599 pretty easily, because all that would be, and I'll just give you a hint, is 4,800 minus 1/8, right? Because it's 1/8 less than 600 eighths. It's 599 eighths, okay? And we'll talk about that more later, and if that sounds confusing, don't sweat it. But what I mean is, we're using this to really start to be able to truly understand multiplication, because when we get to that 2 by 2, that 37 times 29, it is a great base to work from, okay? So again, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email, feel free to post it in class, and otherwise, I will see you all in class tomorrow, and hopefully this lesson helped you out a little bit. Thanks.